South African Airways will be receiving another cash injection from the government. This is less than 6 months since it last received a 10 billion rand bailout. Well, SAA hasn't recorded any profit since 2011. Up next, I'm joined by Guy Leitch from the South African Flyer magazine. Good evening, Guy. Thanks very much for your time. Well, SAA says there is nothing wrong here. Capital injection is normal between an entity and its shareholder.
Yeah, except that this is not a capital injection. This is a operational funding requirement. They're not making any money. They're losing 5 billion rand a year. That's 5 billion rand a year. And they expect to do that for the next three years. They're asking for a further 17 billion rand, 5 billion now, 12 billion over the next 3 years. This is a huge amount of money, and it's to run operating expenses because they're busy cutting the airline down to size, you might say, and that means that they're cutting a lot of revenue out of it, but it's going to take them a lot longer to reduce the expenses. So I'm afraid the taxpayer is going to have to pay a lot more money to keep this airline going.
Well, the government seems to be saying, under this guy, we have faith in this airline once more. It does look like he's got his finger, on the pulse of the airline, and he will turn it around.
Well, that's the 17 billion rand question, isn't it? There's Mr. Vuyani Jarana, who's the CEO, the first CEO in 10 or so who's capable of turning the airline around. Well, we'll just have to see. It's the government's putting our money on the line to do that. I think that the point must be made, though, that although it's going to cost us another 17, probably more like 20 billion rand to keep the airline going and to see if they can turn it around, it would cost a lot more than that. It would probably cost double that by my calculations for them to close the airline down. And then, of course, it would be, all the 10,000 or so jobs that the airline provides would be lost, and all the connectivity in terms of routes and transport would be lost. So the government is just saying, well, okay, hopefully we've got the right jockey to run the airline this time. He is putting a lot of quality new management in place because a lot of the best management left under the previous chairperson, Ms. Dudu Myeni. So he has done an aggressive recruiting campaign, got some world-class people in. I think this is the best chance we've had for the airline to be turned around since 2011. But it's still a long shot. And let me point out that the airline market is now very different to what it was 7 or 8 years ago. It's a lot harder. The Gulf airlines have really taken up, eaten a lot of SAA's lunch. So the airlines like Ethiopian, they've come in and they've really taken over the routes that SAA used to run. So there's very little left for SAA to try and make a profit on.
But what, in your view, is wrong with SAA? In other words, taking out what faces all airlines across the world, that is like high fuel prices, the fickle and uneven enthusiasm of passengers and so on. What is particularly wrong with South African Airways?
There's nothing that you can particularly put your finger on other than just a general widespread malaise of poor management and poor cost control. A lot of people have remarked that the airline is in fact actually in pretty good shape operationally, in that it sells its tickets at quite a good price, quite a high price, and actually still manages to fill most of the aircraft. That means its loads or its yields are good. Yes, the airline does suffer from structural problems or legacy problems. One of the biggest is that it's what I would call an end-of-the-line airline, in that it is not a natural hub, but it's at the end of a route, so it doesn't naturally have any feed to take anywhere else. It doesn't collect passengers from other places. And that's also why SAA has been battling to feed passengers into South Africa from, say, Europe and the States, because, for instance, from London, it doesn't have a naturally good feed from there as well. So there are a lot of issues, particularly relating to the network, that have to be addressed. Fortunately, they've got a new network specialist in who looks like he's making the right decisions as well. So there is light on the horizon. Yes, the airline's going to become a lot smaller than it was. The notion of a flag carrier will probably finally be put to bed. And we'll find that a lot of people will probably eventually lose their jobs through probably natural attrition, and Mr. Girona has said that he will necessarily start retrenching. But I think that in 3 years' time, if he does get away with what has managed to implement his budget and plans, the airline may break even, but it will be much smaller than it ever was before. Let me just point out, though, that airlines at the end of the line, like in New Zealand, have successfully been turned around. Qantas has been turned around. LATAM, in the airline formed by Brazil, and Chile has been turned around. So it is indeed possible for an airline like SAA to make profits, even if it is state-owned.
What do you think would be the cost to the country if we were to lose this national airline?
Well, you need to look at the costs at two levels. If SAA was just to declare bankruptcy and become insolvent, then the cost would probably be at least in the order of 50 billion rand direct. That would be because it already owes about 30 billion rand, and it would probably lose about another 10 billion rand or so on its aircraft leases, because most of its aircraft, especially the more modern ones, are leased, not owned. And there would be enormous penalties involved in having to pay off the 40 or so billion rands worth of leases. So my estimate is probably a 10 billion rand cost there. Then, of course, there would be the other costs, such as actual retrenchment costs, laying off people and so on. So my guess there would be 40 billion rand, but SAA can't just go bust, because the lenders, the banks, have put in cross-default clauses across all these state-owned enterprises. So if one goes bust, then the lenders can call in all the others. And who knows what that would cost. But, I mean, numbers of 300 billion rand have been speculated upon. You know, it's a huge cost. And this is one of the reasons why the state has just not been prepared to let SAA go bust, but just continue to bleed the taxpayers. Then there are the other costs. These are equally important costs. There's the importance that the airline provides to tourism and to what you could call business connectivity, to global value chains which it enables through providing transport. People will argue that if SAA went bust, well, more efficient private operators would take over, and that's probably true, but there would be probably an increase in price and less connectivity in terms of some of the unprofitable routes that SAA is flying. So there would definitely be a fall-off in travel connectivity services to tourists and to businessmen in South Africa. That would come at an enormous cost. It's been noted or calculated by the World Bank, for instance, that every rand produced by, or every job produced in aviation produces another 6 elsewhere. The knock-on effect would be huge. These are all important reasons as to why SAA needs to be kept going. So the foreseeable future has us spending 17 to 20 billion rand to keep the airline going, with the hope that in 3 or 4 years' time it'll be profitable and it can be sold off, or just a large part of it be sold off to another investor or another airline.